On today's show, we'll talk with the former acting general manager of the New York Mets, Zack Scott, on the state of baseball, analytics in baseball, and the state of the New York Mets. All that and more coming up next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. What's going on, Ruvain?
Not much. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, and you just told me before the show started that your kid's high school coach and the entire staff was fired for losing the championship. It feels like the major leagues or World Cup, or what's going on with that, Ruvain?
Yeah, I have no idea. They had an undefeated season going into the championship game, and they played a team they beat earlier this year. And I mean, they were winning 4-3 going into like the third inning, but we ended up losing. And now they got notified by email that the entire staff is gone. I've never heard of this. I don't think their money was that big part of the budget, but I have no idea. It's just the most random thing. Who does it to a high school team? Especially this coach has been there for like 7-8 years already. I don't get it.
Kind of wacky. As many of you know, I am a coach in this same league. I did not get my pink slip yet, so I will still be back for next year as my son becomes a senior. Should be a lot of fun. Well, we've got a fantastic show today. We've got a great guest. We want to welcome to the show Zack Scott, former acting GM of the New York Mets. Welcome, Zack.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. And, before we get started, I don't know if you saw the All-Star game and Home Run Derby. Any comments? I thought that the All-Star game was rather boring, or, well, not by design, but there's not a lot of offense. The Home Run Derby, I thought was positive. Thought it had great drama. I like the old-time version a little bit better. I think there's more homers in it. I think somebody, Buster Olney, tweeted out there was about half of the homers hit, but it was still a lot of drama. Did you like it?
I honestly didn't watch it. So that day was my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
So I spent some quality time.
Happy belated birthday.
Thank you. Next year will be the big one, the big 50.
Wow.
But spent some time with my family and didn't end up watching any of the All-Star stuff, actually. The game was when my birthday was. The Home Run Derby I didn't watch. So, it's kind of like I did when I worked in baseball full-time. I used that time to kind of recover and take a break and didn't always pay that much attention to it, even though obviously I love baseball.
And I really like the fact that the players went back to their team jerseys as opposed to just a uniform jersey. I think that really brought back a lot to the game.
Yeah, I like that too. I never liked the, usually overly designed league jerseys, and instead, sticking with what people know and like.
So we're going to talk a little bit about analytics in baseball, and I know you're of the analytics-minded type. We are certainly here. I mean, we're the Fangraphs Beat the Shift podcast. By profession, I'm not sure you're aware of this, but I'm an actuary. I used to teach statistics in college. I mean, I'm definitely of the math mind, and so I just wanted to get your take. And my first question to you is, what do you think has been the biggest revelation in analytics? Maybe 5 years ago, and what's the biggest thing going on in analytics today?
Well, first thing I should say is I was on the actuarial track.
Really?
In college.
Wow.
And took the first exam and pretty quickly realized, like, I'm not sure I want to do this where I'm taking these exams all the time. So I dropped it pretty quickly. But when you said that, I was like, oh, yeah, that was something I thought I was going to be.
Wow.
But to answer your question, so I look back, I started working for the Red Sox over 20 years ago at this point. And when I think of how the analytics in baseball have evolved, for me, it starts back there where it was mostly box score level data, right? Like we had pitch outcomes, like everything was results based. There was some, and if it wasn't, it was charted data, right? Like someone was charting the batted ball where it landed, so we could try to do some sort of, defensive analysis, ultimate zone rating type of analysis, or pitches were charted, And a lot of the work, I mean, I remember would record every game back then, and we'd burn it on a DVD, and someone would go through and chart the games that we wanted charted. But then you're buying data that's charted data. So, but it was all human charted data. So that was when I was starting. That's what it was. And you do make the best of what you can and get creative and try to figure out ways to evaluate defense and the things that weren't as easy to evaluate. And then, so that was about 20 years ago. Then about 15 years ago is when tracking really became, that's the first year StatCast. Now we had pitch tracking data and then eventually hit tracking data a little before that, but now we started to know not just the result, but what happened to the ball when it was in flight out of the pitcher's hand, when it was off the bat, and we started to learn more about that piece of the game. So every time there was a big step analytically, you're kind of capturing more of the game, like working backwards, right? First it's results, now it's, okay, what's happening with the ball as it crosses the plate, both out of the pitcher's hand and off the bat. And then, 10 years ago, we started getting more teams doing biomechanical, motion capture data, markerless motion capture using camera systems on the field. And that all of a sudden starts telling the rest of the story of what's happening in a batter-pitcher matchup. So now you know what happens before they release the ball or before they swing the bat, when they swing the bat, what happens before they make contact. And so I felt like those key periods of time is when we started to really be able to understand the full story of what was happening in that batter-pitcher matchup. Defensively, obviously, the StatCast data was starting to track fielders and runners and things on the field. So we started to get much better data about 15 years ago, and 10 years ago it got, we started completing that story. So that's kind of how I look at it. When I look at it, like 5 years ago, it seemed to be more of, enhancements of those things. I thought it became more about application of the tools that were being built, how are you using predictive models and decision making. It also became like became very baseball hardware, whether it was, camera systems everywhere, cameras everywhere, portable systems, portable TrackMan units. The whole lab idea of having pitching labs and hitting labs became much more popular. And it's not to say that people weren't doing those things beforehand. In fact, the lab concept mostly started in college. But that's really, to me, that's when I think back about 5 years, that was when that was really very prevalent and finally, growing in the game. So that's how I've looked at the evolution of things. And I'm sure there's some stuff I'm missing, but that's how I've viewed it.
Yeah, and what's on the horizon going forward that us fans aren't aware of yet?
It's hard for me to say. I mean, I haven't been working day to day with a team in, at this point, 5 years, almost 5 years. And I have consulted for full seasons with a couple teams after that, but wasn't in the office day to day. So, a little more distant to it, but I do have a lot of conversations with people in the game. I think, the most interesting thing I'm talking about with people now is how they're using AI, right? And AI is, the growth in just like the last couple months even has been huge. So I talk to a lot of teams. I'm actually doing some work with AI as well in my consulting business. So that's a lot of the conversation I'm having is how can we leverage this? And I saw that story that came out about MLB banning access to LLMs in the dugout and with the iPads, which I think is probably a good decision. But I'd say and when people ask me like, what's the next baseball ops kind of inefficiency that is going to be solved for, and I've actually said to them, I think it's efficiency, which I think AI will be a tool to help people get more efficient. There will be probably some job loss in the we had this huge growth in the analytics space, and it reduced some of the size of scouting departments because people had budgets and they have to make choices, and they added 30. Everyone has like 30 people in their R&D departments these days. Some teams have 40 to 50. And, with that comes a lot of management challenges, a lot of inefficiency by having so many people doing so much work. And are you actually applying it? And that gets harder. And so I think figuring out ways to become more efficient, it'd almost be like a little bit of a market correction, which, I never want to talk about people losing jobs, but I think AI mostly doesn't replace people. It it augments what they're doing. So I just think the skill sets will change in what they're looking for, and maybe coding is less of something that they're reliant on when hiring. Who knows? But I think there'll be some shifts in kind of how baseball ops teams are structured.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, we can do a whole episode on AI. There's a big rabbit hole. There's one big question that we wanted to ask you because you've been in this situation, and a lot of people have asked me this. Who makes the lineup, the day-to-day lineup? Is it the manager? Is it the front office? Or maybe you can give a percentage of each of them for the contribution to what is the daily lineup? How is it constructed?
It probably depends on who you ask, because
Okay.
I think the idea of, this narrative of the front office writing out the lineup is become a bit of a myth, but it's become that story because different people have different perspectives, and so over 20 years ago when I was first in the game, one of my jobs being the lone full-time in-office analysts, and I say that in quotes because it's kind of laughable what I was doing compared to what kids coming out of college can do in data science today. But when I was doing that work, part of what I did was to talk to Terry Francona and give him some tools. And so, Theo Epstein had me essentially. It was very simple. I'm thinking of 2007-ish, probably around that time. We had guys like Eric Hinsky on the bench. Like, we had some guys that could play on the bench. And so one of the things I would provide Tito with is a report on, if you're going to start one of these guys in this series or the next series, to give them an opportunity to play, to give someone a starter a blow, whatever it may be. Here's the best matchup for Eric Hinsky, for example, right? So that was some information that we gave to him. Now, when I gave it to him, it wasn't you need to play Eric Hinsky, but sometimes that's how it was received. And so what I'm getting at is this interpretation of, if anything's coming from the front office, I'm interpreting it as them telling me to do this. And I think there was a sensitivity around that time because it wasn't as collaborative, use the buzzword collaborative, as it may be today. But I think if you want me to put a percentage on it, I'd say, I know of maybe one team that I feel confident kind of really scripts things and wants the manager to stick to it. I've also heard the manager doesn't stick to it. And so it's not like there's not some wiggle room there. But I'd say 90% of the teams, the manager's doing it.
Okay.
I think there's a lot, what gets maybe confused for that is there's a lot more inputs into the process of managing playing time. Often teams will have a meeting before a game, before a series, whenever it is that they're having these meetings where they're talking about, there's someone from the performance staff. Maybe it's a trainer, maybe it's, the head of the performance team, sports scientist, whatever. They're tracking workload, right? So you have a person in the room talking about workload. You have the manager, obviously. You have usually a bench coach, usually the pitching coach, and you have an analyst. So you have these it's not the same for everyone, but just say there's 5 people in that room making the decision. So the analyst is giving you the objective information, and if the manager, if it's structured this way, maybe he's giving an opinion. But ultimately, it's the manager's choice. And, when I was with the Mets and Luis Rojas was our manager, I told him, I think he thought maybe that I was going to try to tell him how to make a lineup. And all I told him was, hey, I don't believe in overthinking the actual lineup construction of like who's batting where in the lineup. I do care more about who's playing and whether that makes sense. But I also know it's not just about matchups. It's also about health, mental health, physical health, all those things. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I know you also have to play a bench guy sometimes, just to keep them engaged and involved and ready to go should they have to play more. So there's all these other factors. And so I just told him, as long as you're not batting our best hitters, at the bottom of the order and our worst hitters at the top, you're not going to get a whole lot from me. I do think there are some things that we would talk about, the whole your 2 and 4 hitters, those things. But for every gain you get from moving a guy one spot up, or you lose something, right? So you move another guy down, you lose some of his plate appearances, and you gain some plate appearances, but maybe it's not optimal because of the shape of that player's type of performance. So I tend to think I've asked this question of a lot of people that work for teams because I just think it's a story that's taken off and it's not really true. There's nuance to it for sure. But I think it's just easy to be like, oh, they're just telling them what to do. And I think part of that is that perception of any input is telling me what to do. And I don't think that's that much of an issue as much as time has gone on, but it definitely was an issue.
Now, you mentioned the evaluation of specific players. How much do analytics go into the evaluation versus, let's say, the old school scouts and even versus even actual production, a la that boardroom scene in Moneyball when the scouts are saying one thing and the analytics are saying another thing? So, how much percentage wise? How do you think you break that down?
Well, today's game is very model driven. So teams are building these predictive models that put dollar values on every player. It's kind of like a layered look at the player, but they're combining the scouting reports. If we're talking about prospects, right? You're putting prospect values on guys. It depends what kind of players you're talking about. So what I would say is in today's game, most teams, if they're major league players, I don't think the scouts' opinions on those players holds much weight. I think there's, because at some point you are what your performance is, right? Like that's just, if you're a consistent big league performer, like you kind of are that. We know that. It's not even, a lot of times it's not, there's not really a point
I can
in
tell you
scouting.
that's true from projections, that once a player has accumulated enough plate appearances, you sort of know him.
Yeah. Yes. So that's why you've seen a lot of teams kind of push their pro scouting coverage down. So it's like, basically, when I've looked at data in the past, and this is dated information, but we found that, players over 24 we weren't getting that much impact from the scouting report because we had so much data. We could track all those things I talked about at the top. We could track every movement of these guys, so we can kind of piece together and we can run studies on that to figure out, well, what actually leads to success, what predicts success. And we could get really good at that. And when you try to fold in scouting information on those players, it wouldn't change it. Now, that's just the ability, predicting performance of a player. It's not accounting for makeup. It's not accounting for health necessarily. In some ways you try to, but so there's other factors that aren't captured in those things. And there's other ways, so scouts become important on the, work you're doing on a player's makeup. You want to know who you're getting as a human being, as a person. So there's still things that happen. It's just a reduced role, or at least a very narrow focus on what they're adding value to. Maybe sometimes there's an injury and you want to get eyes on the guy to see if he looks different than what he looked like. But even that, when we have this, if it's a big leaguer, we have all the biomechanical data, we can kind of tell if they're doing something different. So that, what happened there is, it became not as useful to scout major leagues, even, the veteran AAA teams. If you had prospects at those teams or some young players in the big leagues, it was different. You get like a 22-year-old breaking in the big leagues and hasn't played a whole lot. Like, you still want to get eyes on that guy, but are you going to acquire that guy? Probably not. And then they pushed it down to, Dominican Summer League. And so you'd start getting way more looks on the real young players where you may have an opportunity to get them early and get impact from them. So it wasn't that it became, for most teams, it wasn't that scouting became less important. It just became shifted, kind of like what I was saying for AI. They're still important, but their responsibilities look different. And when we ran models, I always say this, that we ran predictive models and we tested them, and if we ran one model, let's say this is a prospect model, we ran one model that was purely quantitative, ran a second model that was purely qualitative scouting, and we ran a third model that was a blend of the two. The blend of the two outperformed either of the other two. So,
oh, sure.
So that told us that scouting is really important. So you can't. It would be foolish to devalue it. I do think there's some teams that have probably inadvertently reduced the value of their scouting staff by introducing a lot of analytics into their process. And what ends up happening is you might be sending the message, or they might be interpreting that as, well, they want me to my scouting report needs to match what the data says so I don't look bad. And then you start converging those two viewpoints, and you take away the value of the scout, which is projecting forward, right? Like the data is telling us what's kind of happening now and how that compares to big league, stuff or whatever you're looking at. It's different skills. And the scout really adds a ton of value in projecting forward, projecting physically on the player, projecting based on athleticism what they may be able to do versus a guy that's less athletic. So they're providing real value in the evaluation process. And I think there's some risk when you start giving all this data to scouts that they start losing their value. And I think that has happened with some teams.
Oh,
so
for
then
sure.
what happens is they study it and say, oh, our scouts aren't providing value. And to me, I would ask, well, did you unintentionally reduce their value, and now you're reacting to that over time after a few years.
Yeah. I mean, I know from doing the ATC projections, which is an aggregation model, that, any one system, no matter what it is, whether it's automated or whether it's manual, not as good as the blend of the two, because each of the components provide different parts. And especially when you're doing a baseball team, it's not a very top heavy, right? In basketball, you got 5 guys on the court, one guy's a superstar, that one guy will dominate. Baseball, it's about an aggregation of accumulation. I mean, we all watched Moneyball, and it's exactly right. So blending both models sounds like the way to go. A question for you, and I don't know if I've shared this on the show before, but I actually did interview for the New York Mets a little while ago. Before you, it was the Brodie Van Wagenen era.
Okay.
And actually, they liked me. I got up there, but things sort of fell apart when I sort of told them what I currently made as an actuary. I think, yeah, you're laughing, but it's that's sort of.
I know.
It's and this is a New York Mets, who are a Major League Baseball team. It's a New York market, and
Steve Cohn, remember?
Yes.
Pre everything.
Yeah.
They had 3 people on staff at the time for analytics, and they're looking to beef up 2 more. 3 to me is a small number to handle and at the time the Rays maybe had 15, 19 people. They didn't want to pay, and my question to you is, why aren't, and maybe they are now, but why weren't major league teams paying for analytics for top guys?
Right.
When you run it, there's 2 ways to run a company, Scott. You can either have a budget and just pay for whatever's in the budget, or you can buy people who are worthwhile and thereby increasing your value. The better organizations are the ones who do that, and I don't know why that's not prevalent in the major leagues.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. So in my role, in Boston, I had a lot of these conversations, whether it was with our CFO, our owners, trying to convince them to look at things differently, look at this as an investment, and also consider people with the skills. And this is at a time where we were smaller than we would have liked in the analytics space. We wanted to grow, we wanted to invest more, but I had to make the case for and put together a plan over multiple years on how we do that. And they were at the time wanting to be a little more conservative and not add too many too fast, which was fine. From a management standpoint, I think that can make some sense. But there's a cost that comes with that. When you have teams in your division like the Rays, adding a lot of people and moving forward very quickly. So the conversation I had was we're not just, when you're talking about people with these technical skills, you're not just competing with other baseball teams. You're competing with a lot of companies that are interesting and doing interesting work and pay a lot more. And we're never going to compete budget-wise, probably, with the Googles and Metas of the world. So that's fine. They're going to probably still pay 3x, 4x what baseball teams could offer. But it was important that if we really wanted to get the best people, which is what we were stating, we can't just rely on, you should just be grateful to work in baseball, because there's other things they could do that are pretty cool. So,
yeah.
And I had some success, but I'll say this: I think what's going on, and this is now. So, if you didn't know, one of the things I'm doing. I have a couple business things going on, and one of them is representing baseball coaches, managers, executives. So, I'm putting on like a labor hat here, right? But one of the things, and actually the law changed on this in recent years, is you used to have all these salary surveys. So you have this closed industry of 30 businesses, and they would share how much each position is getting paid. And I don't think anyone was looking at that as, we want to keep people's salaries down. Like I had some of these conversations with people. Like I don't think that was the intention. But when you do that, you kind of get, whether it's intentional or not, the effect of collusion. So you're basically, and I'm not accusing anyone of collusion, I'm just saying essentially the same thing happens, where you just look at it as, oh, this is normal for baseball, that this person, a director of analytics gets paid this, and a senior analyst gets paid this. And to me, I thought that was so limiting, and that you needed to look outside of the industry to actually get the people that you think could make an impact. So yeah, no, I totally get that, and I'm glad those laws changed, where teams are not allowed and leagues are not allowed to do salary surveys or aggregate that data and share it with teams for that reason. So because we already have enough restrictions on employees. They have to go through the permission process, and the team can always deny permission on them interviewing for a particular role, no matter whether it's a promotion or not. And so, there's not a lot of mobility for people in the game. And so there's a lot of control that the teams have. And if you love baseball and you want to be in that, that's part of the problem is they keep the range of salaries pretty tight. I think it's gotten better over time. I was proud that we had some of the highest paid people on our group. It was still like laughable compared to some other industries. Yeah. And when I went to the Mets, to your point, the Mets were known as not paying well, and especially considering the New York market, where people are living. And it was one of Steve, I was with Steve in his first year as an owner, and that was a huge initiative for him, he brought in an outside consultant to go through all the salaries and do a study to say, wanting us to put people on a better starting point if they were underpaid. And so it was great. I got to give out a lot of raises to people
that sounds fun
right away, because it was just like, let's recalibrate here and get people to where they should be, and then reward people for good performance and things like that going forward.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I just telling you my experience, and it sounds like my experience is your experience, but I'm glad to hear that it's slightly being rectified right now. Who knows? Mets, if you hear this, you never know. Just give me a ring. A quick question, though. Maybe you can answer this quickly. If you had to pick a stat, just one stat, either a sabermetric stat or a pure surface stat, what would be the best all-encompassing stat you can use for a hitter or for a pitcher? One stat for each.
So it's a tough question, because I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you just focus on one stat. But
obviously,
I will say, when I think about what I'm drawn to just kind of quickly browse what players are doing, I do love the expected stats. If I'm looking at current performance in the big leagues of a player, I'm going to look at, ex-WOBA, really for both hitters and pitchers, to see what are they actually doing. Take out the noise, as much of the noise as you can, and as much of the luck. You're not taking all the luck out. So, there's other things that can happen that aren't going to continue to happen over time. So usually, that's the stat that I'm drawn to when I'm just kind of browsing online at how guys are doing. But everything you do when you're working in baseball is predicting the future. So it's mostly about projections. It's an understanding and I like to understand the whole picture of a player. So yes, I like WAR, but I need to understand the layers underneath it, and I want to get a clear picture of what that player is bringing to the table, because just WOBA alone for a position player is obviously leaving out base running and defense. So, but you asked the question, and that's my answer. WOBA, nope. If I had to pick one.
Now, after we spoke all about this analytics, is baseball too analytical and too analytically driven today? I mean, was it a little better when there was less analytics? When it was just, I'm bringing a lefty in to face a lefty hitter, or we're taking a righty, or doing a switch hitter, that type of thing, putting a guy in just for speed, that type of thing. Is there too much analytics? Is it ruining the game, quote unquote, as some purists would say?
Well, I'm biased towards looking at the game analytically, but I do think teams, front offices, I'll give you more of the front office viewpoint. I do think teams have become too reliant on models, and just like there's a risk of using AI tools and using any of these tools almost can make it easy to take away some of the thinking, and you don't want that. You want both. So, I do think that there's some of that where people get really scared to deviate from things, and there are real reasons to deviate. You say you build a projection model, those things can vary quite a bit. So, thinking about how that affects decision making, you don't want to use a model and then just like arbitrarily go away from it, because then why even use a model? But so having things though objective to anchor you in your decision making can be helpful. It can be the difference between, the example I always use in my past is, we were valuing Pablo Sandoval as a $45 million player, which was still wrong. He was worth a lot less than that in hindsight. But we valued him around 45. Then why did we end up paying him 95? Right? So if you're using those tools well, there's some, it shouldn't just be I'm sticking to 45 and I'm not moving off of that. But how do you get, so far away from that? That shouldn't happen if you're using tools that kind of keep you within a certain expectation of variation in performance and things like that. So I think it's important, but yeah, I do think I see a lot of fear in some GMs and not wanting to look bad by going away from the model. It's easy to blame a model or blame some sort of analysis to say like, this is why I didn't take this chance, because it's really all about risks. You have to take some sort of risks in this game to build a winner. And it doesn't mean always big financial risks. It could be playing young players is a risk because they may not perform. There's an unknown there. So there's different kinds of risks. And so you still, that is a key part. You can't just be totally beholden to the model. So I do think that. And then I also think it's affected the quality of the game play on the field. The job of people in baseball operations is not to create a product that's entertaining. The job of in baseball operations is to win. So when you're using tools, very sophisticated tools and analysis to figure out how to optimize your team for winning and ideally winning in a sustainable way, then you're going to start doing things that could, when everyone starts doing them, create a game that's not as fun to watch. And so I think that has happened. There's times where I'm like, I hate the opener. I don't like that. But I understand it. And I don't like the fact that we've optimized pitchers and taken some of the action out of the game. I didn't think was great, but I also knew that's what we had to do in baseball ops. So, that's the downside of that. And that's more Major League Baseball's job, right? Is to make sure the product is still a good one and an exciting one. And they've been good at making changes.
Right, and you mentioned the quality of the game. One of the ways that MLB tried to make the quality better or to make fans more engaged is by adding the extra wild card berth and adding more teams in the race, so that when the team falls out of the race, they still have something, they're not just worried who they're going to trade. So my question to you is this: what is the effect of the extra wildcard berth on teams trading players and not trading players away at the deadline, and the fact that they moved the deadline back a little bit even? They moved it toward like almost the middle of the first week in August, which was something new. And is this good for baseball?
I like that they moved it a little bit later. It's not that much later, but I think that there's real value in teams knowing where they're at before they have to make such irreversible decisions. I think that obviously affects the supply and demand dynamics to some extent. So if you have more teams in it, you're going to reduce the supply, but you're going to increase the demand. So in theory, you should have some big overpays, you'd think, or nothing happened at all. And we probably have more of the latter than the former. So it could be good for baseball in terms of action. I think that's one of the things that drew me to baseball as a kid, was I loved all the transactions. I thought that was always what I was drawn to, is the strategy piece of building a team, putting the puzzle pieces together of a team. So I guess that's how I would think. It's good in the sense of, if there is more opportunity for deals, the teams that are selling, if that dynamic creates good markets for the sellers, then you could argue those teams that aren't good have a chance to recover faster. But I think the combination of that dynamic and the over reliance on models, I think there's more conservative people making these decisions, so it leads to more paralysis probably than it does to exciting deals.
Well, you mentioned about the transactions. Have you ever participated in a fantasy league? I'm not saying while you were acting as a GM, but I'm saying like either before then when you were younger, when you were first getting into baseball, just trying to put your own team together and see how it works.
I never was big into fantasy baseball. I did play it a few years with some friends and found that it was like a no-win situation for me. Like if I did well, they'd be like, "Well, you should do well," because at the time I was working for Diamond Mine Baseball, which is a simulation. So I was really into Stratomatic Baseball as a kid, the Dyson
Nice.
card game
Yes.
version of it, not the
That was
computer
good.
version.
Yeah.
And then my first baseball job, I worked for 4 years for Tom Tippett at Diamond Mine Baseball, which was a simulation software. Our biggest competitor was Stratomatic at the time, eventually out of the park, kind of past all of us. But so my job was to do projections. My job was to analyze players. And so if I did fantasy baseball during those years, it was like, well, you better win. This is what you do for a living. And if I lost, it was, the butt of all the jokes. I was like, what am I
Get a
doing?
real
It's
job.
like more pressure.
Right.
But I was more into, as part of my work at Diamond Mine was to actually play in a league and go through that experience. So I knew what our customers were doing and playing in a league where you draft the players, you'll hold some of the players and redraft new players, things like that. So that was a lot of fun. I liked that a lot.
I play against Steve Phillips right now, by the way.
Oh, you do? In
Yeah.
fantasy baseball?
Yeah.
Or-
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's interesting.
Does he know
drafting
what
next
he's
to him.
doing?
It's very cool.
I like some of his draft picks.
Nice.
I like my aggregation and stick to value better. But
Yeah.
he told me that Zack Wheeler was a risk. Why am I drafting him this year? Okay. Anyways,
That's
all right.
a fair assessment with health and everything.
Yeah,
but
that's yeah.
it just didn't work that way.
It was. I guess I got lucky, skilled, whatever you call it. State of baseball. Wanted to get your take on it. We know that there are some issues with the new collective bargaining, owners versus players association. Could be a looming lockout. What's your take on if there will be baseball in 2027? Are we going to miss some games? What's your take on a salary cap? Whether the players and owners are going to be really stick to it? What do you think a salary cap or not should be? Curious to hear your take. And yeah.
So it doesn't look good at the moment, right? There's a very public negotiation. Everyone's putting out press releases about the details of their offers, which it's just an odd dynamic in general. But it never looks good at this point. So I don't think we're learning anything right now. We're learning about some of the issues that they are focusing on, but nothing becomes real until money can be lost. So I'd like to believe that baseball has been doing really well and thriving overall in the aggregate, that cooler heads will prevent, and the players are doing well and making lots of money, that I would like to believe that they have both sides have too much to lose and they would come to an agreement. Now, these things aren't always rational, right? So I would assume there's definitely a lockout in December, just like we had, what was that, 22? Now, do they miss games or a significant amount of games? I'd like to think that no, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I'll say this, if the owners are going to stick to a salary cap, then they're probably going to lose a lot of games, because I do think, right or wrong, that has always historically been where the Players Association, the strongest union of sports, has drawn the line and has not gone over it. So I think that's a losing battle for the owners, and I don't think they need it to get what they want. So I think you can, I know Rob Manfred came out and said, the way we've been doing it with election, it's not working. And he's right. Like I wrote an article about it, and I basically said the taxes is just like a cover charge for some teams. It doesn't really matter. So I think making those punishments, the financial punishments, more harsh can have the effect. They're just not being harsh enough. And obviously the players wouldn't just cave to something like that if it's an effective salary cap. You look at what the NBA's all this talk about, the second apron and how that's effectively a hard cap. Well, that rhetoric may not be helpful to this situation in baseball because they may not agree to something with more punishments. But I think there's two reasons why that hasn't worked. And the big one is the huge revenue advantage the Dodgers have for the TV revenues, which was part of a bankruptcy settlement with Frank McCourt, and which is unfair and doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's like the only thing, because it's just so out of whack, that needs to be fixed. And the parties, even though it was ruled on in court, like the parties can renegotiate that if they want to. So I think that's got to be part of it. And I think the owners, they already presented that idea. So I think some sort of revenue sharing that's actually fair, because the Dodgers have this ridiculous built-in advantage, will take revenue out of their pockets. So right there, they're being punished.
Isn't that inter-owner, though? Isn't it, what
Yeah.
does that have to do with the players? That should just be an inter-owner thing.
Yeah, it is. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think that but this is the premise of where I'm coming from. Is the rhetoric from the commissioner is always, this is about competitive balance. Like, these small market teams can't compete. Well, if it's really about it, which it's not, right? It's not. It's about money. But if it is really about it, then let's actually focus on competitive balance. And that's one of the things. Is like, you could still do revenue sharing. You can have a soft cap, essentially, by changing the way that teams get taxed and be more aggressive in some of those things. And you could raise a floor in some way, some intelligent way. But I also think, like, competitive balance should be not forcing teams to spend in free agency, which has the highest financial downside risk. But there should be some oversight on where they spend their money, and it should count in infrastructure as well and other things. Because if the goal of every single team, which I believe is the goal of every single team, is to, at least every baseball operation, is to win consistently, we'll build an infrastructure or structure a deal around that. I don't think that's really the goals of the owners. And I think we're seeing things that don't make sense for baseball, like not getting rid of high school eligibility. There's just these things where I'm like, do they even know how this works? And so I wish that it was really coming from a place of competitive balance and what's best for the league and the fans.
Yeah.
For them to solve. But I still think, like, there's just too much at stake for the two sides to blow up a season or a big chunk of a season.
Hope
Yeah.
you're right.
If it's about competitive balance, it's really about a salary floor rather than a salary cap, and about making the teams that are not competing compete. That's really what it is.
Right.
Stephen A. Smith put out an idea of, let's not have a salary cap in terms of dollars, but maybe a salary cap in terms of years. Maybe players shouldn't be able to sign more than 6-7 year contracts and defer payments. I mean, why is Ohtani making $2 million a year and deferring? That's sort of not allow those kinds of gimmicks. I mean, would you be up for that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with the deferrals. It's a mechanism that teams can use. Obviously, the bigger issue with the Dodgers is that they have so much money. So, they get Ohtani because they can afford to pay that over whatever length of time, and not every team can. But they're getting taxed at what that he's treated as a $40-something million player. He's not treated as a $70 million player. And I think, maybe some people think that he should be treated as a $70 million player. But time value of money is a real thing. So why don't I believe that they should be treating it the way they are handling it. So I don't have a problem with the deferrals, because it's not like they're
okay.
It's counting as only $2 million towards their tax payroll. I don't find that as a loophole. I just think it's a different way to structure a deal. And a lot of those times it's about optics. It's about being able to have the big headline of some ridiculous deal, and then when you get into it, you're like, oh, he was for $700 million, and then you look at it and it's like, well, really $460 million, which is about right when you look at Trout. Like, it made sense. Soto was the one that didn't make sense, right? That went like way over, and it was all none of it was deferred. It made zero sense financially to why should he be worth $250 or more million than in present value than the next guy.
Well, I don't think Bobby Bonilla worries about the deferrals too much, because he's getting his paycheck every July 1st.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the Mets. Obviously, you worked for the Mets. Not a great situation this year. They've got about the third worst record. Can the Mets win in the short term? We're talking in the next year or two.
I think the Mets can compete. When you say win, do you mean win a championship or win a division?
Yeah, let's say win a
Be
in the
competitive.
playoffs?
How about be competitive? How about that?
I think
No,
they
no,
could be
no.
competitive. Okay,
Win the division. Win the division.
win the division. Because I was saying, and we talked earlier about the postseason. It's like you can get in with 80 to 85 wins, or 80, like 83 wins. So, I think it'll be really hard, but I think they can because they have resources, but they also have a ton of commitments. And hearing Steve talk about next year's commitments, the way that I've heard him talk about it publicly, makes me feel like they're not going to be spending a lot. So they're going to have to get creative, or figure out why some of these young players that were so much expected from them years ago, back when I was there, the prospects that are now in the big leagues that are just not doing it. Beatty and Vientos and Mauricio, like it's just, what do you have in these guys? And maybe it's just time to cut bait on them. I don't know, but but I think they can. I think they have like a decent enough, 4 guys or so for the rotation. They need to add. They need to change their team. I don't love some of the things that they've done, but I'll say this: when I got to the Mets, it's Steve's first year. He comes out, new owner, says at the press conference, "I want to win a World Series within the first 3 to 5 years," and I know he's kind of taken that back since then. But when he talked to me and at the time Jared Porter about that and what's our opinion on that, because he said that before we were there, we both were on the same page that, well, your window is better on the earlier part of that because the core of your team is in their prime. And so I think, David Stearns is kind of wearing it from the fans, and I get it. He's made some choices that haven't worked out, and some of them were maybe head scratchers at the time for some. But I'm sure what's going on under the hood is pretty good in terms of infrastructure because he's a smart guy and he's done that well in the past. But I think anyone that was going to be in that role was going to go through this transition away from that core, and it was going to be really difficult to compete. And I've been in those situations in Boston where you see like the next great version of your team on the horizon, but getting there is really hard, and you're trying to compete at the same time. And I think that's kind of where they're at, and why they made trades like the Nimmo trade with Simeon, and it's more of a savings on the back end, getting to a better place financially with flexibility sooner, which makes it less about the current year. So those are the signals that I'm reading, is that they think of it as more like they're a couple years away. But I think they have an exciting outfield. They've got some arms. They have some players. They have some guys that have underperformed. Obviously, Lindor's had an off year. If they don't move him, which I wouldn't expect them to, I think he bounces back and has a solid year. Although he's getting up there in age at this point, So I think they have a lot of interesting pieces, and I don't think there's no reason they shouldn't compete for a playoff spot. I'm not sure on the division. I'd have to go through all the teams and figure out what they're looking like for next year. But it's not going to be. It definitely would be a grind to get in there.
Well, you mentioned the Brandon Nimmo trade and the failure to sign Pete Alonso in the offseason. Who would you say, quote unquote, blame? I know I'm putting you in a tough spot here. Who's to blame more? Is it the general manager? Is it the manager for not pushing them or getting the most out of them? Who's most to blame for the Mets and for any team that's just underperformed? Who do you think is more at fault for it?
Well, generally, it's a lot of factors, right? Like anything, it's never a simple answer. So it often falls that the GM is that head of the baseball operation, but I think it's an organizational thing. When you succeed as an organization and you fail as an organization, if you're in that role of president of baseball ops, you obviously have to be accountable and take responsibility for it because that's your job, is to put a winning team out there. But ownership is part of it, and I don't know. I'm not pointing to any specific thing, but some of the money that's been spent, obviously Steve's aggressive. You know, it's a lot of things. They've also had many different general managers over a period of times, and these things are, you know, they've probably gone through different player development systems throughout with all these different people, and you know, how did that affect the Beatties of the world? I don't know. I'm not making excuses. It's just the reality that the Mets have been this unstable organization for a long time. I liked that Steve came out and had David's back and made that comment of, I don't want to be that organization that changes GMs. I don't want to be my other organization, the Red Sox, right, that changes GMs every 4 years. There's a real downside to doing that, and I've lived it. And it's hard to get everyone rowing in the same direction when you're constantly changing, and then the people that stay through all those changes, they get really. It's a tough way to live. It's very stressful. You don't know where you stand, and it can affect job performance. And so there's all these organizational issues. So yeah, I mean, you blame, to me, the owner and the president are the ones that, you know, build these things, and the president's the one making the baseball decisions. So, you know, that's how it works. I don't know the real answers. I don't know what's under the hood, right? We're outside of it. We can't really know all the whys. But I'll say this: I was in Boston. We'd win a championship, and then we'd finish, you know, last place to championship to last place, and we had some roller coasters during, you know, that I'm thinking of that 2013 World Series that we won. And then it took us a while when we started to integrate our young core of Mookie and Devers and Benintendi and Jackie Bradley and all those guys. It took some time, and we ultimately won with that team in 2018, but it wasn't an overnight snap your fingers thing, as it tends to not be with young players.
Yeah.
So it's hard, and there's, you know, years where everything goes wrong. You know, the 2006 Red Sox, we traded for Beckett, big trade, and you know, Hanley Ramirez becomes a superstar, and Beckett struggles that year. But then the next year, Beckett is helping carry us to a world championship. And Mike Lowell's MVP of the World Series, who was part of that trade. So there are years where everything just seems to go right. Like 2013, everything, we weren't a championship caliber team. We had everything go right. And part of it was maybe our guys were driven by other things with the whole marathon bombing, and you know, there was a focus like no other focus I've seen with a team through 162 in the postseason. But talent-wise and on paper, we had a lot of guys have career years that year. And, you know, it didn't surprise me that we fell back quite a bit the next year.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would suggest that the clubhouse and the manager does have some influence right there. You know,
Yeah.
specifically on Nimmo and Alonso, and yeah, I don't know how much the general manager takes into consideration the fan base and the long-lasting things. I mean, my wife has not gone to a Mets game all year. Because her favorite player, Brandon Nimmo, was traded. And she also loved Pete Alonso, and she loved coming and hearing the trumpets for Edwin Diaz. And to me, it's a little bit short-sighted because Nimmo could have been a lifelong Met, so did Pete Alonso. And certainly trying to replace Pete Alonso's production with an injured plus Jorge Polanco. I almost said Placido Polanco. Jorge Polanco. You know, just that just can't be. So I'm wondering your take on that, and you know, also the fact that you have Soto here. You know, I know you said that trading for Semien and getting the money off the books now, maybe that's the way to go. But you have Soto in his prime. If you're going to buy a $760+ million player, doesn't that mean that you're competing right now? So why wouldn't you, if Pete Alonso's the best first baseman on the market, just spend the money rather than go after an downside Semien, an injured Polanco, and trying to piece it together, and let's trade some guys for Peralta, see what he can do. It just seems very weird, and interested to get you know, former GM's take.
Yeah, I think that would be the obvious counter to targeting a couple years from now is like, well, that's a couple prime years of Soto that we'd be doing that. So yeah, no, that makes sense. You know, I'd also say, like, was Soto part of the president's plan, or was that more of, you know, I think when you get to money that level, that's almost always the owner, because I don't
Doesn't
think
sound like a Stearns type of
no,
buy.
I don't think any GM would sign a guy to that contract.
Yeah, yeah.
And everyone loved him, and there were like
Bichette
3 or 4
also.
teams.
Bichette, that doesn't sound like a David Stearns thing to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's short, right? It's a short deal in high dollars, so like that approach can make some sense. Like it's not tying you down. So let's look at Pete Alonso. There's a couple things I want to say about the Mets and Mets fan base in general. I think you're right. Like it's kind of analogous to what I was saying about analytics focusing on winning and the league has to focus on the quality of the product. I kind of feel the same way with baseball ops and owner, right? Like we tend in baseball ops to look at how do I build a winner, and winning will take care of everything else. The fans will be happy if we just win. And if an owner feels like, yeah, but there's an emotional attachment that actually brings people to the ball, whatever reasoning he has about a certain player, then that's should be part of the conversation. But I don't think that's how baseball ops people are wired, right? Because they don't care about the marketing. They don't care about it's like we just need to build a winner and everything will take care of itself. That's kind of has to be the mindset, even though that's not necessarily the reality.
But like the Mets give out the Mets give out Kids Club, and the reason for free tickets, and you do that because you want to ingrain a long-time Mets fan for here on in. I mean, my son caught a ball off the bat of Pete Alonso as a kid, and he loves Pete Alonso because of that and goes to many games a year. It's sort of counterintuitive to offer these programs, but then say, well, I guess that's the Mets marketing, but let's not run the team that way. I don't know. It's something to it. I mean, I found myself and my wife going to the last game of the season with the Islanders, even though we were out of it, because we wanted to see the people,
Sure. Well, I think that, that's a real thing. I'm not trying to say that's not something of value, but when you're building a team, like they didn't not sign Pete Alonso because they didn't want to have him be on the 2026 Mets. It's about years 3, 4, 5 more than it is about years 1 and 2. And it's about, again, every team's goal is to build a sustainable winner. Like we want to compete every year. That, there's a belief, I think, that the players become more, especially if they're homegrown, the fans start gravitating towards them. And I will say this about the Mets fans more than, obviously been in Boston, which is a very intense fan base. Been, the Yankees are as a rival, an intense fan base. What made the Mets situation unique to me was I felt like there was a stronger attachment to those homegrown core players, Pete and Nimmo, and just that group more than most places. And I don't know, I would think about that. It's like, I don't know if this is because they haven't won in a long time, when a lot of people haven't experienced that winning because it was a long time ago. And so, when you don't, you've struggled in seasons, you become more focused on like individuals and the personalities and that sort of thing. I don't know. I don't know if that's right, but it felt much more intense, this attachment to the guys. Like Pete Alonso is a Met and should always be a Met type of thing, which I understand. At the same time, it's like, okay, well, if you're in baseball ops and you're looking at, like, what do the 2026 Mets look like with Pete Alonso? In one of the best years that you're going to get from him, probably. And they're still probably not very good. And I'm not saying that's what they looked at the time, but that's probably the reality right now. And he's on a team right now and he's not winning. And I looked at that core and felt like there's something was missing in the Mets when, there was McNeil as well. There were other guys that were since gone. There was, I didn't want to be overweighting this feeling of like, there's just not this, I'm even at a lack of words to describe it. Like, it's just not a championship caliber club in the way they go about their business. And I think that's actually one of the things that I admire about Lindor and really dislike some of the narratives that are out there about Lindor that are almost like villainizing him. He came in and wanted to set a high standard. And, that was my goal too was, a lot of what I talked about was we need to raise the bar. I think that the standard was too low in a lot of ways for the old, the Wilpon Mets, owned Mets. And so there was a lot that needed to be improved. And I think, those guys coming up through the minors with the Mets, like they only know what they know and hadn't been exposed to like real success. Not that Lindor's won championships, but he's been consistently on good teams and came very close to winning a championship. But he, came in and I appreciated him because he'd hold guys to that standard and want them to be focused, want them to be locked in. So when I see from afar, people talking about him and Steve even talked about it, like, yeah, clearly there were some issues. I don't know what those issues are. I know, he had an issue with McNeil when I was there, but it was for the right reasons. It was because he felt like a teammate who we need to all be on the same page. This is someone that's not doing what we're supposed to be doing as a team. And in that case, it was like team defense, right? Like, we're not following with the positioning. And so you're going off and doing your own thing and creating bigger spaces or smaller spaces and, kind of messing up our team infield or whatever. He'd call people out. Like, that was, to me, being a leader. Maybe there's different ways to do it for different people to be more effective, but I believe he really wants to win, and he wanted to bring that kind of mentality to the Mets, and I don't think they had really had it for a long time.
Well, last question. The Mets announced today that they are open for business, and they're going to be trading a lot of players away during this deadline, and see what they can get for that. What do you think they will do going forward? What do you think is going to happen during the offseason? What are they going to try to do? Are they going to try to make a big splash, or just try to fix spots here and there?
It doesn't feel like a big splash market this offseason. There are some good players, obviously, in the free agency, but, when I look at the free agent list, it's hard to see where that is. I would expect them to, they should be open for business. They should be willing to talk about anything. I know, like, there's reports that they've said there's like 4 players that aren't willing to talk about. Everyone else is on the table. Like, I get that, especially if they're young core players or, Soto's case. And although, why not listen on him too? Like, there's if you can kill it with a deal that brings in, you said at the top, Ariel, that, talk about, it's not the NBA, it's not basketball, it's not a one-player sport. You need to have a lot of good players to be a winner. So if there's opportunities to do that, you should be open-minded. It doesn't mean you do it. You hold the bar really high on some of these guys and listen. So I expect, obviously, the free agent guys to get traded. The Peralta, Minter, Rayleigh types. I think going into the offseason, they need to add another, what they thought they were getting in Freddie Peralta, someone that could be at the top of the rotation with McLean. And, maybe that, I don't know who that is. Is that a Joe Ryan? I don't know. I don't know if it's not that clear that guy's, obviously, Skubal, but I'm not sure if that makes sense. And that goes back to, what are their goals? Is their goal to win now? Is their goal to win a couple of years from now? Because that, to me, changes the equation when you're talking about the kind of dollars he's probably going to get, and the age equation. So, it's hard to see it. I think it's more about doing some little things better than you did them last year. Maybe that's Brandon Lau playing first base or something. I don't know. I haven't looked at what a trade market can look like. It's hard to know those things from the outside. I'd say, like, there's not a whole lot of help in the high minors for them coming. They've graduated a lot of their good players. Hopefully Jonah Tong can kind of get back on track or where he was. Because he's looked like a really interesting guy, but is having a tough year. So it's hard when I spend some time looking at them. It is hard to see a short-term solution that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think, trading Lindor makes a lot of sense. You're not going to get a lot for him because he makes a lot of money and he's having a bad year. And so if someone's interested, it almost would feel like a dump, and I don't think that makes sense, because if you are trying to win, he's going to be a key player to that. So I think it's disappointing for Mets fans if it goes this way, but it's probably just doing some of getting those smaller or mid moves right and going short on a lot of those. I think that approach makes sense. The idea of Bichette, I think that just some of the players that they were focused on haven't always made sense from the outside looking in to me. Thinking of, like, I loved when the Chaminade had moved to get him the first time, and then to extend him, it didn't make sense to me. It was like, you got to go find the next Chaminade. Montas signing, like those types of things. I didn't really get them at the time, but I understood to some degree. You're trying to, get. The market can be crazy, and you're trying to see if you can, optimize these guys and get the most out of them and find some values there. So I think it's going to be tough, because I don't think it's Again, I don't know the trade market, what that's going to look like, how that will play out, but it's going to be a less than, it's not the most exciting free agent group.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the Mets doing what they did in 2024 in signing Sean Manaea, Luis Severino on, this is a high upside but low risk because they underperformed previously. And the goal in doing that is, well, you're not spending that much. If they hit, great. If they hit and we're not doing well, they got a trade chip for a prospect in the trade market. If they hit and you make the playoffs, well, you've done it, and that's what the Mets did in 2024. They made the playoffs. Certainly,
Right.
if they didn't make the playoffs, well, now you've got two good performing assets that you can trade that you signed for almost nothing. So that's to me, I think, what Stearns is all about and what he will do, which was sort of not what he did at the start of 2026, which puzzled me. It's sort of not very against the good crafty efficiency that he did 2 years prior.
Yeah, I'm not sure what changed. I think they were trying to do some of that. Like the length of the Bichette deal aligns with some of that. They definitely seem to be trying to, outside of Soto, kind of limiting the length that they're giving the players.
They had to pay
Obviously,
Bichette, though, $40 a year.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
It wasn't a low risk. Polanco was one of those types of moves.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Like, there's definitely a big difference in the dollars. But I think part of their risk management strategy seems to be mostly on years and using financial might that they have to be able to overpay. I mean, even Polanco, that's an overpay on the short deal. I understood that they can do that. So, if you're going to fill some holes, may as well check some boxes off. I guess you can do that.
Yeah, that's what Stearns looks at. He's like deals like no more than 3 years, relievers no more than 2 years. He has a certain set of values that he has, and he tries to stick to them. And then when he deviates, they're sort of glaring.
Yeah, I mean he has if that's his stated strategy, he has a clear vision and can be disciplined about it in a tough environment to do that. When you have, this isn't Milwaukee, right? Like, this spotlight is a lot brighter, the focus, the angst is a lot stronger. It's not a Midwest crowd. And he knows it, he's from New York. It's different. It's, like, I worked with Chaim Bloom only for a year in Boston, but it was kind of the same idea of, like, bringing in that Tampa mentality, which obviously works. But
working this year.
Let's not forget that they have, whether they win or lose, the same number of people are paying attention to them, right? So they can be first of all, they have to be experimental. They can be very experimental, and it's not going to get much of a response either way. So it's almost like, we used to joke in Boston, it's like they were a think tank, and we were jealous of that. Like, we were envious of the fact that, like, we have a lot of emotion tied to what we're trying to do, which just makes it harder to make these difficult decisions when you have a rabid fan base, you have owners and other people in senior leadership that feel that pressure. It's just different. Taking that out of the equation makes it a little easier to operate. Like, I always thought the best scenario is when you have the fans that are really into it, kind of like a St. Louis situation, but they're so nice. They're so Midwest. Now I'm from Boston, so I don't mean to I'm not tearing apart Boston people. I love people from the Northeast, but it is just different. It's just a different mentality.
Expectations. It's expectations. Each city is what it is.
Cardinal fans are the greatest. They come, they go to a Met game, they sit quietly, they're intellectual, they know what they're doing, and they're pleasant. I love Cardinals fans.
Exactly.
Zack, this was a really fantastic hour. I really appreciate you coming on and just giving everything you have about the state of baseball and analytics. Before we let you go, is there anything you want to share? Maybe what you're working on now, and anything to promote?
Sure. Well, I'm doing two main things. One, as I mentioned earlier, I'm working with for PBI Sports, running the baseball side of that, which is representing baseball coaches, managers, and executives on the baseball ops side. But I'm also consulting. I have my company, Four Rings Consulting, and that's working with decision makers in and out of sports. So it could be other businesses where it's focused on a lot of what I just talked about, the kind of the noise around decision making. There's all sorts of studies on, what leads to bad decisions, and a lot of it is not the analysis. It's not the actual objective work. It's the pressures and the room and how the dynamics of the room. These human dynamics that can often lead to tough decisions. Like, it's not a room where maybe people create a comfortable environment for people to disagree and have good debate before you make these decisions that you can't take back. So there's some of that, and also building out some AI tools to help them create more of a system to think through their big decisions before they happen without paralyzing them. So those are the things I'm working on. I'm out on social media, on X, on LinkedIn, at Zack Scott Sports. So yeah, that's what I got going on. I'm about to launch a Substack newsletter in the next week or so.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we'll definitely promote that. We'll forward the link to everyone on who's listening here and on Twitter myself. Zack, thank you so much once again for coming. And we will be right back after the break, everyone, with Waiver Wire and Injuries with Ruvain. All right, we're back. Fantastic interview with Zack Scott, acting GM of the Mets. A lot of great stuff with analytics and about the state of baseball. But we will also do some fantasy as well here, and we'll jump right into it, Ruvain. Let's do the waiver wire for this week. Who do you got that you should pick up for this coming week?
All right, so I got 3 players, 3 hitters, and I actually have a relief pitcher or 2 here. So I'm going to start with Tristan Peters, the all-star from the White Sox. He's only 24% owned in CBS. Last 3 weeks, he's batting .345, 3 homers, 12 RBIs, 12 runs, and a stolen base. So he's contributing everywhere right now. And like I mentioned, he's only 24% owned in CBS, so he's a guy who's available most waiver wires, so look for him. Another guy who's getting hot recently, and you can maybe get a little power binge out of, is Tyler O'Neill. In the last 2 weeks, he's batting .294 with 4 homers and 4 RBIs. His homers have only been solo home runs, but he's only owned in 6% of CBS leagues, which means he should be available in a lot of places. Don't look at his year-long stats. Just look what he's done recently, because he is a very streaky player, and if you can catch him before he gets hurt again, hopefully he doesn't get hurt, but before he gets hurt again, and you get some of that power, that's great to have off the waiver wire. Also, a little lower-known player, Joshua Kuroda Grauer. I hope I pronounced that right. From the Athletics. He's only 14% owned from CBS. He was called up. He's played in 12 games so far. No home runs, 1 RBI, but he's batting .422, and he has 1 hit in at least 10 of the 12 games he's played. Now, the question is, if you want to look him up and see what position he plays at, each league is different, because he's played 4 games at second, 7 at third, and 2 at short. So you have to check for eligibility for that. As for a couple relievers I want to throw out there, Ryan Jefferson of the Angels. The last 3 weeks, he's pitched 7 in the third innings, a 1.23 ERA, .82 whip, and 12 strikeouts. And another guy, Garrett Clevenger, last 3 weeks, 8 in the third, 1.08 ERA, 1.2 whip, 11 strikeouts. So if you don't want any of those 2-start pitchers, or if you want to try to throw someone, to help your ear and whip, those 2 guys are guys to look at.
All right. You mentioned Tristan Peters already, who's pretty hot here. And I'll just mention a couple of others. We'll start with closers. Yandris Gomez, he's the Minnesota closer, 11 saves on the year, 9 saves since May 26th. He's less than 50% owned on CBS. I'm not sure why. In a year that it's hard to get saves on the waiver wire, in a league that rewards saves, you should be owning him universally. Andrew Kittredge saved the last 2 games for Baltimore. Is he the guy? I don't know, but he's worth a flyer in deeper formats just in case he is, for at least some of the saves share. A couple of guys who are coming back or coming up. Luis Robert coming back soon for the Mets, so get a hold on him. Harry Ford, prospect for the Nats, catcher, being called up. Interesting there. Charlie Condon on the Rockies. Could be called up, could make a fantasy impact. Set your thermometer, barometer, everything, radar on him. And Stephen Kwan, he's been dropped in a lot of leagues. He has stunk this year. Not like Stephen Kwan. Don't exactly know why. I'm having trouble figuring out the story, but you can buy him for cheap. Hope he turns it around and take a flyer on him if you need to make a jump in your league.
Well, Stephen Kwan's actually been batting over, I think, .340 or .350 over the last couple of weeks. So he's mainly a batting average guy. So he's a perfect guy to get in your lineup if you can get him now.
Yeah, and for people who are looking at year-to-date stats, they'll see garbage. So
Yes,
yeah,
don't.
yeah. So that's a guy who you can get. All right, pitcher preview, Ruvain. Anybody else coming up? I know it's the short break. We only have a couple games this weekend, but we might be looking forward to next week, and there are some good matchups out there.
Yeah, well, I'm not really looking at matchups. I'm looking more at the pitchers who may be helping you possibly long term for the rest of the year. Matthew Liberatore from the Cardinals, last 3 weeks, 21 in the third innings, 21 strikeouts, 2 wins, a 4.22 ERA, 1.22 WHIP, which is reasonable for someone who's on the waiver wire. Is only 20% owned in CBS, so he's a possible guy that if you want to plug in there, his ERA is not going to kill you. His WHIP is not going to kill you. He's playing on a team that's doing surprisingly well, so you may get some wins, steal some wins there. Another guy who I actually saw pitch. I went to my first Met game this past Sunday, and I saw Zack Thornton pitch against the Red Sox. His pitching does not overwhelm you. His pitches in the upper 80s, low 90s. A lot of the pitchers are actually under 80, which is really cool to see a pitcher actually do that and get away with it. But his last two starts against Philly and against Boston, 13 innings, 7 hits, 12 strikeouts, and 1 earned run. The Mets have already said that he is going to start the second half of the year in their rotation. So if you need a starter, he seems to be doing pretty well. He's one of the lower prospects on their totem pole, but so far he's done well, and right now he can be available in almost every single league.
Other Mets pitchers, the game that I went to, first game of the season, Christian Scott pitched. He looked good. He looked good today as well off the break. Sean Manaea, he's really ramped it up. He came very slowly, starting the bullpen, but now, since May 22nd, 3.59 ERA, backed up by a 3.55 xERA and a 3.80 xFIP, 17% strikeout minus walk ratio, 1.22 WHIP. Mets need innings, and he's going to give them. Couple of other guys, Brandon Pfaadt, since returning from the minors, he's posted a 1.72 ERA, 0.89 WHIP in about 15 or so innings. That's a guy also you can take a chance on. If you're looking at season-long numbers, he'll look terrible, so maybe he'll still be available on your waiver wire. And one good two-start week, Tyler Mahle. His starts next week at Kansas City versus the LA Angels. It does not get better than playing the two worst teams in baseball and at good ballparks. So if you ever want to use Tyler Mahle, it's this coming week for a two-start week. Injury report, Ruvain, coming out of the break. What say you?
Well, let's start with the player who got hurt during the All-Star game. We'll start Junior Caminero. He was hit in the hand during the game. He was actually hit by Riley O'Brien during the All-Star game. It hit his, I believe it was left pinky finger. He went out of the game immediately. X-rays were negative. They have a doubleheader coming up, and he's expected to play both games tomorrow, which is Friday. So we'll see how that works out, but he's not expected to miss any time, so that's a good thing for all those Junior Caminero owners, which is a lot of people. Brendan Donovan still has not yet begun a rehab assignment. They don't know, the Mariners don't know when he's going to come back. He's been dealing with a groin issue basically since May 15th, and there's no timeline for his return. Kyle Harrison of the Brewers was landed on the IL last week with left forearm tightness. He made his last start, and supposedly the Brewers weren't too nervous about it, but they still wanted to put him onto the IL just to make sure that everything's okay, because he has been pitching pretty decently this year. Robert Gasser was called up. I don't know if you want to roster him, but he's just a guy to think about. Jesus Sanchez is closing in on a rehab assignment. He has been out since July. He's been out for a while, actually, since June 27th. I'm sorry, with an ankle injury. He's been, he's getting ready. He's going to have the rehab assignment. He should be activated pretty soon. He's only 17% owned in CBS, which means a lot of people may have forgotten about him. And if you look at the stats up until when he got onto the IL, it's not that bad. So that's something to watch for. Ranger Suarez was sent to the IL with a left groin strain. The MRI was just showed a groin strain and nothing else, but they don't know how long he's going to be out for. Brian Bayo was called up, and I actually saw Brian Bayo pitch against the Mets. I mean, it was against the Mets. He pitched really well, but again, it was against the Mets, and he was a piggybacking off of another pitcher, so we'll see how that works out. And Corey Seager, also on the IL. He seems to end up on the IL every other week, unfortunately. He had just returned from the concussion list, from the 7-day concussion list, and now he's back on the IL with a lower back issue, lower back inflammation. Ezekiel Duran looks to get more playing time at shortstop while Seager is out.
All right. Well, that's the end of our show here. Fantastic show with Zack Scott and a little bit of waiver wire. Ruvain, what's going on with you?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come, and the next man up.
And I'm Ariel Cohen. I'm over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, on Twitter at ATCNY, and over here at Beat the Shift. The ATC projections did have a refresh at the All-Star break. Check it out. Rates are all updated, and they'll be updated probably another 2 or 3 times till somewhere in early September. All right, once again, big thanks to Zack Scott for coming on the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.